Lately, I'm finding it more and more difficult to decide what topic I want to talk about on a Shabbat. There's just so much going on in the world, and there's so much going on in the Jewish world. Between Israel, anti-Semitism, everything. But as I was reading the Parsha this week, our ancestors celebrated the crossing of the sea, and they sang out in joy. I kept thinking about two things. A midrash I learned long ago as a child that I went to go read up on again. A midrash about how when the angels wanted to sing in celebration along with the Israelites, God chastised them. God said, "Why would you sing? Why would you celebrate now? The Egyptians were my creatures too. I created them. My creation was destroyed. Not an occasion for celebration." And everything right now happening with the war in Gaza. And these two things together have been on my mind. Because while I absolutely think Israel has the right and the duty and the obligation to defend itself, and I absolutely think that the world's just gone topsy-turvy and absurd. We saw with the charges from South Africa of apartheid against Israel. And in defense of Israel, one of the strongest supporters has been the German people in the country. And the charges of genocide are ludicrous. And yet I see over and over, whether it's on social media, posts that make me cringe, make me ashamed. Posts that really are a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. Because they celebrate not salvation, but they celebrate the death. They celebrate violence. Posts from within our community, the Jewish world. Comments from Jewish leaders and Israeli leaders that all they do is lend support to our enemies because they say things that really sometimes they shouldn't. Israel must defend itself. And I'm not a strategist for the military. I have no expertise in that, and I won't try to analyze the actual strategy on the ground. It's not my place. But there are civilians that are being killed. There are children that are being killed. And even if it's necessary to root out Hamas and evil, to destroy our enemy that needs to be destroyed, not something to celebrate. I saw one post with a picture of a young child, probably 9, 10, holding a sign, Free Palestine, in a Jewish group. And the comment under it was, why don't we send them to Gaza and see how they like it? It's a 9-year-old Canadian kid, a 10-year-old Canadian kid. They don't know better. They're doing what their parents give them the sign, what their teachers, what others give them the sign to hold. That kind of comment, though, is atrocious. And to see there were likes, to see people went to criticize that comment and others defend it and criticize the person criticizing it. We have to be united as a people. We have to defend Israel's right to defend herself. But we also have to make sure we don't give our enemies fodder, our enemy material to quote, to post online, to show how hateful Jews are or Israel is. It's a blessing, I think, that some of the voices that are most critical of the Israeli government come from Israel. That some Israeli newspapers, Israeli civil rights organizations are some of the voices that are most critical. Because it's how I know Israel doesn't have a mass plot for genocide. That Israel, even though at times individuals may make mistakes or do bad things, there's no mass conspiracy by the government to do such things. Because Israel is the true democracy in the region, is the only democracy in the region. The only place anywhere within its neighbors or its nearby borders where you can criticize the government the way Israelis do. That you can speak up. That when something goes wrong that shouldn't have happened, it comes to light and we know about it. So I was thinking about that as I was reading our Parsha and that Midrash. But there was something in that too, because God says, The angels shouldn't be the ones singing and celebrating, but God doesn't chastise the Israelites for singing and celebrating after the death of the Egyptians. And the question is, what does that mean then? Is it just for angels not to celebrate, but we human beings can? But even that sense of when our enemies suffer, we shouldn't take joy, plays out in Jewish law. We sing Hallel on the first days of Pesach, but not the last. We don't do a full Hallel. And the reason being goes back to that Midrash, is what's quoted, that we shouldn't be joyous in that same way when it's a day where others died. And so with all of that, I found myself reading different commentaries, trying to figure out where the balance is. How do we navigate this? How do we handle it? And I found a teaching from the Yismach Moshe, from an 18th century Hungarian rabbi and Hasidic Rebbe. And in his comment, he talks about Jacob, Yaakov, and that Yaakov was greatly afraid of what his brother Esau might do to him, and had every right of self-defense to fight and to kill his brother. But that Yaakov didn't, and that it was a good thing. Because even though Esau in rabbinic literature is always used to represent our enemies, Rome and others that sought our destruction throughout history, Yismach Moshe brings up that several of Esau's descendants went on to be righteous Gentiles who saved Jews, who lived with their neighbors with love, with kindness, with peace. Death and destruction is not a Jewish value that should be celebrated. Self-defense is a Jewish value and a right. And that's what we're seeing with Israel, self-defense. But the language we use, the way we talk about the war, the way we talk about what must be done, we have to be careful. Because to use words of joy or celebration, not that those in this room have used those words, but there are certainly those in the Jewish community that have. It just gives something to our enemies. To print in newspapers, to post online, to do damage to the image of Israel and the Jewish people around the world. But more than that, we shouldn't talk that way, not just because it's not practically beneficial. It's not Jewish. We don't celebrate death and destruction. Israel is a beacon of democracy in a dark area. As Jews, we have to be a beacon of light into the world. That was our mission. To uphold our values, not become like those who wish to destroy us, to preserve our lives. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, the IDF is there to do that, to handle that, and is doing a phenomenal job of that. But we also have to remember what it is we're preserving, our traditions and our values. So that afterwards, when there isn't a physical existential threat to the Jewish people like there is now between Hamas and anti-Semitism around the world, we won't have the threat of nothing left, not having the values we try to protect disappear on us. So this Shabbat, I ask us to invite us to reflect on how we can be beacons of hope and beacons of light in the world. How rather than trying to score the best sound bites, instead, we can stand up to ensure that the values, along with the Jewish people, will live on forever. Am Yisrael Chai, Shabbat Shalom.